Hello and welcome to CineMaine, where we look at films that are connected to Maine, whether they be set in Maine, filmed in Maine, or have any other loose connections to the state of Maine. With the incoming release of the first film in DC's new cinematic universe, no, their newest cinematic, there you go, I figured now would be the perfect time for me to review my all-time favorite Superman film. Sorry, but not even close. No, but definitely getting warmer. Jeezum crow, no, I said my favorite Superman film, which is, of course, The Iron Giant. I mean, yeah, that kinda counts, right? Okay, not really, but I mean, it's a Warner Brothers movie, and a lot of the themes and imagery do feel like something that would come from a Superman film. And Superman is referenced in some of the film's most pivotal moments, so I figured it was the right time to finally talk about this film. I know some would argue an actual DC Comics movie that is connected to Maine would have been far more fitting, but I'll save that for the next time a new DC movie hits theaters. But for now, time for me to talk about one of my all-time favorite animated films. Initially set to be a rock opera from The Who's guitarist Pete Townshend, before eventually becoming a non-musical animated film directed by future Incredibles and Ratatouille director Brad Bird. The film is also based off of the Ted Hughes novel, The Iron Man. No, that's actually why the title got changed. There, that's better. Now enough fooling around. During the height of the Cold War in 1957, an object from space crashes into the ocean just near the town of Rockwell. A young boy named Hogarth Hughes goes to investigate and finds that it's actually a giant alien robot. After forming an unlikely bond with the giant, he tries his best to keep his existence a secret. He of course finds that hiding a secret giant alien robot is easier said than done, especially when in the midst of pursuit from paranoid government agent Kent Mansley, who may not exactly have his heart in the right place when it comes to what to do about the giant. What connects this film to Maine is of course the film's setting, the fictional town of Rockwell, Maine. In the film, Rockwell is located on Maine's coastline. The exact location of Rockwell within Maine is something that has been up for debate among fans of this film, and fellow Mainers such as myself. The official Wikia site for this film describes Rockwell as being near Portland. There are scenes in the film that hint towards a more precise location, however. There's the film's opening scene where this sailor is giving his ship's coordinates. The latitude coordinates are 44 degrees north. This info combined with the fact that Rockwell is portrayed as being on Maine's coastline suggests that Rockwell could easily be Camden. Or more believably, Rockland or Rockport. You know, since those other two towns start with rock. The longitude coordinates, however, are never mentioned in this scene due to the sailor being startled by the giant's sudden appearance. They are, however, mentioned during the climax of the movie, when the USS Nautilus requests the coordinates to launch missiles at 67.71972 degrees west by 44.50177 degrees north. People have used these coordinates to determine that Rockwell's real-life location would be an eastern Maine town called Addison, which is located in Washington County. That's kind of a ways away from Rockland or Rockport, and even further away from Portland. Like, a lot further. No! Considering that this is an animated film, it's obvious that this wasn't filmed in Maine because that's not how animated films work. There surprisingly is a filming location section on the film's IMDb page. The only location listed is Los Angeles, which I'm assuming is where a lot of Warner Brothers animated productions were made at the time. Despite production taking place in Southern California, though, some of the animators did actually take time to visit Maine before production began, taking photos and videotaping various areas such as forests, diners, barns, and different homes in numerous rural communities, in the hopes of accurately replicating Maine's visual aesthetics. And as someone from Maine watching this movie, I can attest to the fact that these animators definitely achieved their goal perfectly. This movie beautifully replicated different parts of Maine, particularly in coastal areas. On top of being inspired by the photographs and videos that animators took of Maine, the visual style of the film was also inspired by Norman Rockwell's artwork, to the point where he was the actual namesake for the town in the movie. The art design was also influenced by New England artist N.C. Wyeth. The look of Rockwell's countryside and its town square both perfectly capture rural Maine's architecture. The film also beautifully showcases what Maine looks like during the fall. utilizing a warm color scheme in the foliage that vividly reminds me of that time of year. The same can be said for the film's portrayal of Maine's wintry climate. Even though nearly every scene in the film takes place during the month of October, it does start snowing in Rockwell during the third act. And while I haven't seen it happen often, I've definitely seen it snow during October at least 2 or 3 times in my life. The snow effects during this part of the movie, along with the skyline, both do a great job capturing what Maine is like midday during the late fall and early winter. There are also some minor details here and there that also remind me of Maine. One example involves this scene at the diner that Hogarth's mom Annie works at. The background characters in this scene have surprisingly good down east accents. Much like Pet Sematary, this is particularly apparent in the way the word beer is pronounced.
Unidentified? Well, knowing you, Earl, I'd say it was either whiskey or beer.
There's also the home of a beatnik artist that Hogarth ends up befriending named Dean. Once Dean learns about the giant, he reluctantly helps Hogarth hide him in his yard, a junkyard full of scrap metal that Dean likes to use to create artwork. This, combined with his home being in a hangar, for some reason reminds me of this store known as Route 1A Relics in Ellsworth. I'm reminded of that store's exterior, particularly when the film focuses on Dean's scrap metal artwork hobby. It could be a lot of the metal that was used to create that building, but I digress. Another subtle reminder of Maine is this one scene where Hogarth and the giant go swimming. I'm reminded of when my family would take me to go swimming in Moosehead Lake back in 2003. And man, does this scene capture how cold it is to swim in a lake in Maine. There's also a funny sight gag I noticed before the giant jumps into the water. The headline of the newspaper Dean is reading says "Disaster seen as catastrophe looms." And almost instantly, the giant's cannonball causes a brief but humorous flood. The exchange Dean has with a guy driving a truck full of pigs is pretty funny too. Overall, the film makes great use of its setting, not just in terms of geography, but also in terms of time period. So much so that you could honestly make an entire video just connecting things in this film with things that were happening at that time. There are references to things like the Red Scare, the space race, the Blue Book investigations, obsession with sci-fi B-movies, and the general anxiety and paranoia that most people had over the threat of nuclear annihilation, among other things. These things aren't just here solely to remind the audience of the late 50s setting, though. They still tie into the movie's themes. The giant, of course, came from space, and the ambiguity of the giant's origin, and the potential threat that some may see him as, is not only a fitting metaphor for the paranoia that so many felt as a result of the atomic age, but this also ties in beautifully with themes about choice, mortality, and what it means to be human. Hogarth is instantly aware that people could see the giant as a monster and react irrationally if they discover him. And as the giant spends more time with Hogarth throughout the movie, the more he wants to be like him and be viewed less as a menace and more as a hero. Thus, when the townspeople of Rockwell do eventually learn of the giant's existence, it's nice that they're actually amazed by him rather than reacting out of fear. Then again, it helps that they all saw him rescue a couple of kids. And while I'll try my best not to spoil the ultimate choice that needs to be made at the end of the film, I will say that if you've seen this film like I have, you know the giant achieves his goal of becoming a hero. Speaking of the giant, the acting in this film is perfect. Pretty much everyone gives a good performance here. The giant is voiced by Vin Diesel, and this was before he became a household name. His deep, bassy voice is a natural fit for the character. A lot of people have compared this role to Groot, to the point where one might be tempted to call this character Metal Groot, but the giant himself is quite compelling in a very unique way. This is a character that came from another world, but can't remember anything before crashing into Earth's atmosphere. His backstory is kept vague, though we do get hints about his past here and there, particularly in the Signature Edition, which I'll get to in a little while. When the giant and Hogarth cross paths and form an unlikely friendship, the giant is essentially like a big child. That is to say, he's incredibly curious and gentle. And we, the audience, get to experience the giant learning about what it is to be human right along with him. You would think that since Vin is primarily known for tough guy roles that this casting choice wouldn't work. But he's surprisingly believable at capturing a childlike sense of wonder and curiosity, as well as regret whenever the giant makes a mistake. This is particularly apparent when Hogarth introduces him to comic books. He of course takes particular notice towards the Atomo character. Later in the film, when he learns about death for the first time, he decides he doesn't want to be Atomo anymore, but would rather be Superman. That detail in particular was one of many that I didn't notice until recently. And I love when a movie's able to have you noticing new things here and there each time you watch it. Eli Marienthal is also excellent as the film's protagonist, Hogarth Hughes. He does a great job at making Hogarth come across as very imaginative, determined, brave, precocious, and even very empathetic towards the giant. He has great chemistry with Jennifer Aniston as Hogarth's mom Annie, Harry Connick Jr. as Dean, who are also both excellent in this, and of course Vin Diesel. In fact, the exchange that Hogarth and the giant have during the climax is actually one of the few scenes in cinematic history that actually does make me a little teary-eyed. Yeah, whatever. Christopher McDonald is also great as Kent Mansley. I love the way this film subverts tropes when it comes to the main villain. Usually in a film like this, there's typically a government agent sent out to investigate what's going on, and an army general that also plays a big part in the story. Except it's usually the army general who's the trigger-happy idiot in this scenario, and the government agent is the guy who's simply just trying to do his job. Yet in this film, it's actually the other way around. General Rogert is the one approaching the situation rationally, while Kent Mansley's the trigger-happy idiot whose actions only make things worse. To the point where everything that goes wrong in the climax is completely his fault. That's a breath of fresh air. And McDonald, of course, does a great job at making a lot of this character's moments very funny. This is an actor who, for the most part, has been kinda typecast as the idiot main villain in nearly everything he's been in. And even though I have seen him prove that he can do other roles than this in some other films and shows he's been in, let's face it, this is the kind of character we always love seeing him play, and this film is the epitome of that. He's really good at making this character's paranoia and idiocy come off as really funny, while also getting the audience to hate him when we're supposed to. He's the kind of bad guy you love to hate. Some of the funniest scenes in this film involve him, including this one bit where he and Hogarth are both onto each other and they both watch each other fall asleep in determination. Not only does this weirdly remind me of that SpongeBob episode where he and Squidward compete for the Employee of the Month award, but the reveal of what happens the following morning, as well as Kent's reaction, are both hilarious. As is another scene involving Hogarth being forced into taking Kent around town and showing him the sights. He takes him to this milkshake bar, and Hogarth humorously sneaks laxatives into Kent's milkshake in the hopes of getting him out of his hair, which of course works. Something I never caught on to until quite recently, though, is that throughout Mansley's continued investigation of the giant after, they not only visually allude to him still dealing with this, but there's also one point where Hogarth's mom asks him if he needs more toilet paper. Had it just been a one-and-done scene of him needing to use the bathroom, it still would have been funny, but the fact that they kept the joke going in subsequent scenes does a great job at making Kent look pitiful, in the funniest way. This is also a good example of the movie knowing how to balance its tone. The movie has a lot of funny moments that come from the more fish out of water aspects, as well as Hogarth trying to keep the giant a secret, but when the movie needs to get serious, action-packed, and even have some occasional heartfelt emotional moments, it never comes out of left field. All of these moments feel 100% organic and leave the intended impact. Speaking of leaving an impact, the animation in this film still looks stellar even 25 years later. Last Christmas, I went to a screening of this film at the Maine Film Center in Waterville with a buddy of mine. This was not only my first time going to a movie there, but also the first time I'd seen this film on the big screen. This kinda made me feel transported back to my childhood when big studios were still putting out 2D animated films, which sadly has become increasingly rare nowadays. With that said, this film looks every bit as good on the big screen as it does in HD and 4K. A good example of this is the giant himself. Much like Casper being the first live-action film to have a fully CG titular character, this film was the first traditionally animated film with a fully CG titular character. I did not notice this when I was younger, and while I can definitely tell that the giant is CG now, the effects still hold up. Not to mention that for a film that came out a quarter of a century ago now, the giant blends in very well with the 2D environment surrounding him. I think a big part of that is the fact that the giant is cel-shaded, as well as the fact that the lighting also helps him blend into his environment. This became apparent to me in one scene where the giant is holding Hogarth in his hands at night, and he really blends into the scenery. You would think you'd be asking yourself how no one in the buildings in Rockwell would notice the giant robot outside, but the lighting does such a beautiful job blending him into the scenery that it becomes quite believable that no one would notice him. Another example of 2D and 3D animation being blended smoothly is the scene where the giant's limbs come back to his body for reattachment after being in a train accident. This scene also perfectly sets up the film's ending. If you've seen this film already, you know exactly what I mean. I only have one nitpick with this film, and it really does feel like a nitpick, honestly. It's during the scene where Hogarth discovers the giant. While it is cool that Hogarth saves him, and the giant recognizes that a human being saved his life, it seems a bit convenient that there's one big switch that can turn the whole substation on and off. I'm no expert on how substations work, but my guess is that most of them can't be turned off this easily. Then again, this movie is set during the late 50s, so maybe back then substations just operated very differently? I don't know. Like I said, this is honestly the closest thing I have to any real problem with this movie. It really is that good, and I'm glad that this is a popular movie nowadays, as this was not a hit when it first came out. Sadly, a lot of animated sci-fi films that I adored as a kid and still like as an adult met similar fates. In fact, even animated sci-fi films today can't seem to catch a break, except for that recent DreamWorks film, The Wild Robot. Okay, at least that film did well, but I digress. Despite the studio doing plenty of commercial tie-ins with different companies, Warner Brothers themselves didn't really do much to help advertise it because they were too busy promoting a film that would end up winning the Razzie Award for Worst Picture of '99. And yet it still made the exact amount of money that this film deserved to make. How weird. Also not helping is the fact that it just happened to be released the same day as a sleeper suspense thriller that really took the world by storm, and a certain superhero comedy based off of a Dark Horse comic that also bombed before gaining a cult following like this film did. But I really wanted to point out that all three films came out the same day because if I had a time machine, I'd go back to '99 and see all of these on the big screen if I could. But again, I digress. Despite bombing at the box office, though, the film gained a big following over the years. So much so that when the film finally got a Blu-ray release in 2015, it became one of the few mainstream animated films to actually get a director's cut, which was dubbed the Signature Edition. And in the years since the film's initial release, the giant character has been referenced in countless movies, shows, and even became a playable video game character, along with playing a significant role in one of Steven Spielberg's most recent films. Personally, I'm just thankful that this Warner Brothers animated film didn't come out at a time when the studio had a meat-headed CEO who would have tried shelving the film for the lame excuse of having a tax write-off. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Going back to the Signature Edition, though, it's worth noting that the biggest difference between this version and the theatrical cut is a dream sequence that the giant has the night after witnessing the death of a deer. This event triggers a potential lost memory from before he came to Earth, where he and other giant robots just like him were annihilating a planet. The dream scares the giant into waking up, and it's worth noting that this dream actually gets broadcast onto Dean's TV, which means he sees a good chunk of the dream before the giant wakes up. I assume this was cut from the theatrical version due to studio executives fearing that this scene may be too disturbing for younger viewers. I like that this scene finally got to see the light of day, and it's cool to see Dean get some insight into the giant's origins. It actually helps the viewer understand an epiphany that Dean has about the giant later on. I will admit, I am wondering if it may have been more compelling to have left the giant's origin as a mystery. Nevertheless, I can't think of any other animated film that has a director's cut, so that's pretty cool nonetheless. It's honestly hard for me to think of who might not like this film. It could just be the Mainer in me talking, but everyone I've ever spoken to about this movie adores it, myself included. If I were to guess, I'd say maybe people who aren't into the sci-fi genre or people that aren't into 50s nostalgia. Then again, I definitely don't care for 50s nostalgia at all, but that did not stop this from being one of my all-time favorite films. So I'm merely just guessing at this point. But if you're someone who is into all of those things, or happen to be a fan of films with stellar animation, films with perfect acting, a great musical score, perfect pacing, and films that know how to balance comedic moments with compelling dramatic moments that have lots of emotional weight, then I could not feel more comfortable recommending this film. Sadly, I can't think of that many animated films that are set in Maine, but as someone from Maine who does have a passion for animation, I'm very thankful that the one animated film that does come to mind when thinking about Maine is easily one of the greatest animated films ever made. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and also be sure to check out CineMaine's website and be on the lookout for future CineMaine content.